They were only 7. Just 2 little girls standing alone in the storm, rain pouring down like the sky itself had turned against them. Their small bodies shook with cold, hair plastered to their faces, clutching a battered suitcase that looked older than they were. No shoes on their feet, no roof above their heads, no one to shield them from the world that had just pushed them away. 2 tiny voices whispered into the dark night, begging not to be left alone. But no one came. No one except for one guardian who refused to look the other way. When Atlas, the police K-9, barked through the storm, Officer Ethan Cole listened. That bark pulled him to a truth darker than thunder and a bond stronger than blood. Before we dive in, tell me, where are you watching from? Share your country in the comments. And if you believe every child deserves safety, hit that subscribe button because this story will break your heart and then piece it back together with hope. The town of Maplewood Hollow sat quietly between pine forests and rolling hills in northern Vermont. On most nights, it was a place of calm. But that evening, the sky had no mercy. Dark clouds churned like an angry sea. Lightning tore across the horizon, and rain battered rooftops so fiercely it sounded like stones striking tin. Street lamps flickered in the storm, spreading faint yellow circles onto streets that were nearly empty. Wind rattled shutters and doors. In the middle of it all, one door opened with a squeak almost hidden by the storm, but its impact was loud enough to change lives. On the porch of a modest clapboard house, Monica Albright stood with her hand gripping the wooden door frame. In the other, she clutched a battered suitcase heavy and worn. Monica, in her mid-30s, wore pressed trousers and a sharp blazer, her auburn hair twisted into a neat bun. Everything about her appearance was tidy, polished, controlled, yet her eyes were as cold as the rain. With a curl of her lip, she dropped the suitcase to the porch with a thud. The latch broke and out spilled a pair of small shoes, a few faded dresses and stuffed toys that quickly grew heavy and soaked in the downpour. "Take it!" she snapped, her voice harsh, echoing over the storm. "And don't come back crying to me." At her feet stood 2 fragile figures, Hazel and Lydia, twins only 7 years old, nearly identical, with delicate faces and matching honey-blonde ponytails. Hazel wore a yellow raincoat much too big, sleeves hanging past her hands. Lydia had no coat, just a thin pink dress that clung to her skin in the rain. Their blue eyes were wide, not just with fear, but with disbelief. Hazel bent quickly, trying to scoop up the sodden toys while Lydia threw her arms around her sister, trembling. "Please, Monica," Hazel whispered through the storm. "We'll be good, we promise." But Monica's eyes narrowed, sharp and cruel. "Promises don't put food on the table. You're nothing but burdens." With that, she slammed the door so hard the frame rattled. The sound echoed like a final judgment in the storm. The twins flinched at the noise, clutching each other tightly. Hazel hugged the suitcase to her chest as if it could shield them, while Lydia buried her face against her sister's shoulder. Together, they shuffled to the curb and sat down on the soaked sidewalk, huddled against the storm. Rain beat down mercilessly, running in rivulets down their arms and pooling around their bare feet. Their small sobs rose and mixed with the rumble of thunder, cries almost swallowed by the storm. Across the street, behind lace curtains pulled against the weather, an elderly woman stood frozen. Clara Whitmore, a widow of nearly 80, lived alone in the house next door. Frail and small, her silver hair framed a face softened by wrinkles and years of sorrow. She wore a knitted shawl around her shoulders, her gnarled hands pressed together. Clara had always tried to look out for the twins in little ways. Cookies slipped through the fence, smiles offered when their father was still alive. Tonight her heart broke as she watched them cast out into the storm. She whispered a prayer, tears brimming in her eyes, but fear kept her from stepping outside. Fear of Monica's wrath held her back, even as her spirit ached. Later, she would understand that simply witnessing would matter more than she knew. Meanwhile, just a few streets away, headlights cut through sheets of rain. A dark police SUV rolled slowly along slick pavement. Inside sat Officer Ethan Cole, a man in his early 30s, tall and strong, his short dark hair already showing strands of gray. His face was calm but tired, the look of someone who had seen more than most at his age. But his hazel eyes, steady, unwavering, carried a quiet strength. Beside him sat his partner, Atlas. The German Shepherd was 6 years old, large and muscular, his sable coat shining even in the dim glow of the dashboard. His amber eyes were sharp, intelligent, always alert. He sat upright in the passenger seat, ears flicking at every sound, posture still and ready. Ethan glanced over at him and gave a tired smile. "Almost done, buddy." But before the words could settle, Atlas stiffened. His body went rigid, and a sudden bark exploded from his chest, sharp and commanding. His paws pressed against the window, claws scratching lightly against the glass as he whined with urgency. Ethan's grip on the wheel tightened. He knew that bark. He had learned to trust it long ago. When Atlas reacted like this, it was never without reason. Slowing the SUV, Ethan followed his partner's gaze through the rain-smeared windshield. And then he saw them. Two small shapes on the sidewalk, huddled together, rain-soaked and shaking. The battered suitcase lay half open beside them, its contents spilling into the water. For a moment, he thought the storm was playing tricks, shadows, illusions. But then one of the girls lifted her head. Hazel's tear-streaked face caught the light of a street lamp, and Ethan's breath caught in his chest. He slammed the brakes, swerved to the curb, and threw the SUV into park. Snatching his raincoat, he bolted into the storm. "Hey!" he called over the thunder and rain, his voice firm but gentle. "It's all right. I'm here to help." The twins flinched, clutching each other tighter. Lydia sobbed. We didn't do anything wrong." Ethan crouched until his eyes were level with theirs, rain running down his face. "I know," he said softly. "You don't have to be afraid. My name's Ethan. I'm a police officer, see?" He pointed to the badge glinting faintly on his chest. "And that's Atlas. He's very friendly." As if on cue, Atlas padded forward, his powerful frame calm and steady. He lowered his head and gently nudged Hazel's hand with his wet nose. Lydia gasped, clutching her sister tighter, but when Atlas sat and wagged his tail once, the fear began to ease. Hazel's small hand reached out, fingers trembling as they touched his fur. The warmth beneath her palm was a lifeline in the freezing storm. She managed the faintest, fragile smile. Ethan quickly draped his jacket around both girls, lifting the suitcase with his free hand. "Come on," he urged softly. "You're safe now. Let's get you warm and dry." The twins clung to him, their small hands gripping his sleeves, their steps unsteady but trusting as he guided them to the SUV. From her window, Clara pressed her hand to her chest, tears streaming freely. She whispered a broken, "Thank you," into the night. Though she could not know it yet, her role as a witness was only beginning. Inside the SUV, Ethan tucked the girls into the back seat, wrapping the jacket around them tightly. Atlas climbed in beside them, turning so his great head rested gently on Hazel's lap. His amber eyes watched them closely, a silent promise of safety. Lydia leaned into her sister, whispering, "He feels like he's guarding us." Hazel nodded, her small hand clutching Atlas's ear as if holding on to hope itself. Ethan closed the door, pausing in the rain for a long moment. His eyes lifted back toward Monica's glowing windows, his jaw tightening. He didn't know the full story yet, but he knew enough. Those girls would not face this cruelty alone. Not anymore. With a steady breath, he climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and pulled away from the curb. Rain hammered the roof. The wipers fought against the storm, but inside the car there was warmth. Inside there was safety. Inside there was the fragile beginning of hope. The drive through the storm felt endless. The road ahead blurred into black, water and yellow lamplight. But Ethan pressed on. In the back seat, Hazel and Lydia huddled under his jacket, their small shoulders trembling with exhaustion. Atlas stayed close, his body a wall of strength, his head still resting against Hazel's knee. He watched every flicker of shadow as though daring the world to try again. Finally, Ethan turned down the gravel drive of his cabin. The small home, built decades ago by his late father, stood strong at the edge of the forest. 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, and a stone fireplace. It wasn't much, but it was sturdy, safe, and filled with the scent of pine and old smoke. Tonight it would be a refuge. He hurried the girls inside, guided them to the hearth where faint embers glowed, and quickly stacked fresh logs. A flame sparked, then caught, spreading warm light across the room. Hazel and Lydia sat quietly on the rug, wet clothes clinging to their skin, hair dripping trails onto the wooden floor. Ethan brought blankets, wrapping each girl with care. "You're safe here," he said firmly, his voice steady but soft. "We'll figure this out." Atlas stretched across the hearth beside them, his massive frame a shield. When Lydia shivered, he nudged her hand with his nose before resting his head gently on her lap. Hazel tucked her fingers into the thick fur of his neck, her breathing slowing, as though the steady rhythm of the dog's presence gave her courage. Ethan stepped into the kitchen and picked up the phone mounted on the wall. His jaw tightened as he dialed the number for Child Protective Services. After a pause, a weary voice answered. The woman on the line sounded overworked, speaking in a flat, hurried tone. "Yes, Officer Cole, I understand," she said when Ethan explained. "But our office is stretched thin. We'll need to file a report, begin the paperwork, and schedule a caseworker to visit. Likely within the next several days." "Several days?" Ethan's voice was sharp with disbelief. These girls were thrown out into a storm. They don't have food, clothes, or anyone looking out for them. They can't wait several days. The woman's sigh was audible, even over the static. "I'm sorry. The soonest we can send someone is Tuesday." Ethan clenched his fist around the receiver, his knuckles white. He wanted to argue to demand urgency, but he knew shouting wouldn't change the bureaucracy. He forced himself to breathe. "Fine," he muttered, his voice low. "Put it on record, but know this. I won't leave them alone until someone shows up." He hung up harder than he meant to, the sound echoing in the quiet kitchen. When he returned to the living room, Hazel's wide eyes found his face. Are they coming for us?" she asked, her voice trembling. Ethan hesitated, then crouched beside her. "Yes, they'll come, but until then you're with me. And nobody's going to hurt you while you're here." Hazel nodded, pressing her lips together, though fear still lingered in her gaze. The fire crackled, filling the silence. Lydia reached for one of the stuffed toys pulled from the damp suitcase and clutched it tight. Ethan noticed the hollows beneath the girls' eyes, the way their wrists seemed too thin. "When did you last eat?" he asked gently. Hazel bit her lip. For a moment she stayed quiet, but then words spilled out in a halting whisper. "Monica, she doesn't feed us sometimes. She says we're greedy. If we ask," she yells. "Last week. We only had bread one day, and then she locks us in the closet if we make her mad." Her small voice cracked, and Lydia buried her face in her sister's shoulder. Ethan felt heat rise in his chest that had nothing to do with the fire. He forced his anger down, not wanting to frighten them further. "You don't deserve that," he said steadily. "What she did was wrong. You're safe now. I promise." He stood, heading back to the kitchen to warm a pot of soup, needing to do something. Tangible, something immediate. As the scent of broth spread through the cabin, the girl's eyes followed every movement, half fearful, half hopeful. When Ethan set bowls before them, their hesitation gave way to hunger, and they ate in silence, broken only by Atlas's quiet breathing as he kept vigil. While the storm raged outside, news began to ripple quietly through town. Word of Ethan bringing in 2 soaked children reached the local diner, where a woman sat scribbling notes into a weather-worn notebook. Maya Thompson, 31, was known around Maplewood Hollow as the kind of journalist who dug where others looked away. Maya had grown up in town, the daughter of a mechanic and a school teacher. She was tall with dark curls that fell just past her shoulders, and a pair of keen gray eyes behind square glasses that missed little. She wore a raincoat speckled with water, and her pen moved quickly, scrawling observations even as her coffee cooled untouched. When the waitress whispered that Officer Cole had taken in 2 girls after some trouble at Monica Albright's place, Mia's interest sharpened. She had gone to high school with Ethan, once knowing him as the quiet athlete who seemed burdened even in his youth. They had crossed paths since, her with a camera, him in uniform, each nodding recognition, but keeping to their separate worlds. But this story tugged at her instincts. Monica Albright had a reputation, polished in public, charming at church gatherings, but whispers of temper and cruelty often trailed behind her, if 2 children had been cast into storm. Maya knew there was more to uncover. She flipped her notebook closed and slipped it into her satchel. Stormore. No storm. She intended to learn what really happened inside that house and why. Back at the cabin, the storm began to subside, the thunder rolling farther away. Hazel and Lydia had fallen asleep on the rug, curled close together beneath the blankets. Atlas lay stretched across the threshold, his body a barrier between them and the outside world. Ethan sat in the armchair, staring into the flames. His call, tow child services, echoed bitterly in his mind, their delay gnawing at him. He wasn't a guardian, not officially, but as he looked at the 2 small forms sleeping by the fire, he knew in his bones that he had already accepted their responsibility. For tonight, and however many nights it took, they were his top protect. Morning broke gray and heavy, clouds sagging low over Maplewood Hollow. The rain had thinned to a drizzle, but puddles still lined the roads like dull mirrors reflecting the sorrow of the previous night. Ethan Cole, in his pressed uniform, stood outside Monica Albright's house. The white siding gleamed faintly damp, shutters rattling against the breeze. His cruiser was parked at the curb, Atlas sitting in the passenger seat, ears stiff and eyes unblinking as though he sensed the tension rolling off his partner. Ethan adjusted his cap, squared his shoulders, and knocked on the door. He wasn't here to accuse, at least not yet. He was here to listen, to gather. But a storm of his own pressed beneath his calm exterior. The door opened after a long pause. Monica stood framed in the doorway, her auburn hair perfectly coiffed despite the humidity, her blouse crisp as if she had spent the morning preparing for this encounter. She forced a smile, though her eyes betrayed irritation. "Officer Cole," she said smoothly. "What a surprise. To what do I owe this visit?" Ethan's gaze hardened. "You know why I'm here? The girls spent the night at my place. Corrado explained why they were sitting on the curb in a storm with nothing but a suitcase." Monica gave a tinkling laugh that rang false. "Oh, those girls. They're spirited. They don't listen. Sometimes the only way to teach children respect is tough love. I told them to pack and sit outside for a while to think. I certainly didn't mean for them to be taken away." Ethan's jaw clenched. Her words were carefully chosen, practiced even. "That's not what it looked like," he replied evenly. "Neighbors saw you." Monica's eyes flickered with something sharp, but she smoothed it quickly. "Neighbors love to gossip. And really, officer, shouldn't we be discussing how you whisked away children from their lawful guardian?" It could be misunderstood. Her smile was a blade wrapped in silk. Before Ethan could reply, Atlas barked sharply from the cruiser. Monica flinched as the dog's growl reverberated through the rain. Ethan turned just in time to see Atlas leap to the edge of the seat, teeth bared, body stiff, hackles raised. His gaze was fixed directly on Monica, his amber eyes narrowed with distrust. Monica's painted lips tightened. "That dog is dangerous," she snapped. "No," Ethan corrected softly. "He's discerning." He let the silence hang until Monica's eyes faltered just for a second. Then head tipped his cap. "This isn't over, Mrs. Albright. I'll be in touch." He turned, walking down the steps with measured calm, though inside every instinct screamed that the woman in that doorway was far more dangerous than she wanted anyone to believe. Ethan spent the rest of the morning canvassing the neighborhood. Doors opened reluctantly, faces peered out with weariness. Most neighbors hesitated, speaking in lowered tones, but piece by piece the picture emerged. Mrs. Henderson, a retired school teacher with soft curls and trembling hands, whispered, "I often heard crying through the walls." Late at night, it sounded like children begging. She glanced nervously toward Monica's house before adding, "But who am I to interfere in another's family?" A younger man, Mr. Davis, who worked nights at the lumber mill, admitted, "I've seen the girls on the porch sometimes, locked out, thought maybe they were just misbehaving. But now I'm not so sure." The words weighed on Ethan. Fear kept them silent, but silence had allowed cruelty to grow unchecked. As he scribbled notes into his pad, Atlas sat patiently at his side. Yet, his ears flicked every souffle toward Monica's property. Across town, in a small coffee shop tucked between the library and a florist, Maya Thompson hunched over her laptop. Her curls were tied back messily, glasses slipping down her nose, her gray eyes locked on the screen. The smell of roasted beans and pastries hung thick in the air, but Maya was deaf to it. Her search led her through public records, financial statements, and property filings. What she uncovered painted a troubling picture. Monica had been consulting with a lawyer named Victor Caney, a man notorious in legal circles for exploiting loopholes and shielding wealthy clients in questionable cases. He was in his 40s, tall and lean, with a reputation for sharp suits and sharper ethics, or lack thereof. His name appeared on correspondence linked to the Albright household. Scrolling further, Maya found mention of a trust fund established years ago. One belonging not to Monica, but to Hazel and Lydia's late father. The fund was modest, but enough to secure the girls' education and care. Monica, as stepmother, had no rightful claim, yet her transactions hinted at attempts to seize control. Maya sat back, biting her lip. This was bigger than a simple case of neglect. It was money manipulation and greed, and if Victor Kane was involved, Monica wouldn't hesitate to weaponize the law to her advantage. Her phone buzzed. Mia glanced down and saw a text from an unknown number. "Meet me by the church at dusk. I have something you need to hear." When evening fell, Maya walked cautiously down the stone path leading to St. Luke's Church. The rain had stopped, leaving the air heavy with damp earth. By the gate stood Clara Whitmore, her shawl drawn tightly around her frail shoulders. Clara's lined face softened when she saw Maya. "You're the reporter, aren't you? The one who writes about things others ignore." "That's me," Mia sighed gently, closing her notebook under one arm. "You saw what happened last night," Clara nodded, her eyes filling with both sorrow and resolve. "I saw Monica throw those little girls out like they were garbage. I've seen too much, heard too much, and stayed silent too long. But no more. If you need a witness, I'll be it. I'll testify." Maya's throat tightened. She reached out, covering Clara's hand with her own. The old woman's skin was thin, cool, but her grip was steady. "Thank you," Maya whispered. "This could change everything." Clara lifted her chin, eyes glistening in the fading light. Those girls deserve better than what's been done to them. And if Monica thinks fear will keep us quiet, she's wrong. I'll speak the church bells, tolled the hour, their echoes rolling through the valley. Maya scribbled notes, her heart pounding with the weight of what had just been given to her. Not just testimony, but courage. That night, Ethan sat at his cabin desk, reviewing his notes from the neighbors. The firelight flickered, casting long shadows across the room. Behind him, Hazel and Lydia lay asleep on the couch, curled beneath blankets, their breathing soft and even. Atlas rested near the door, ears twitching as though still on duty. Ethan's eyes drifted to the frame photo on the mantel. His academy graduation years ago, when ideals were still fresh. He had sworn an oath then, and tonight it felt sharper than ever. The pieces were forming, neighbors too afraid to speak, Monica hiding behind a mask, financial secrets waiting to be uncovered, and 2 children clinging to hope. For now, the girls were safe within these walls. But Ethan knew the real fight was only beginning, and it lay in the shadows just beyond. By the next morning, Maplewood Hollow hummed with whispers. The storm had passed, but in its wake, it left stories. 2 little girls cast out into the night, taken in by Officer Ethan Cole and a German shepherd who refused to leave their side. In a small town, news traveled on the wings of gossip carried through the diner booths, church pews, and barber hop chairs. Everyone had heard something, though the truth was hazier than the drizzle still clinging to the air. At the cabin, Ethan poured himself a second cup of coffee, his mind heavy with the weight of the investigation. Hazel and Lydia sat at the table, quietly sharing toast, their eyes darting toward the window as if fearing Monica might appear at any moment. Atlas stood near the door, ever watchful, his tail still as a sentinel's flag. A knock startled them. Ethan rose cautiously, hand-brushing the edge of his holster out of instinct. When he opened the door, he was met with a tall, broad-shouldered man whose face bore the wear of both years and memory. "Ethan Cole?" the man asked, voice growly yet kind. His eyes were pale blue, set deep in a sun-lined face. A thick, gray beard framed his jaw, and his posture, though a little stooped, still carried the air of discipline. He wore a faded army jacket with patches sewn carefully along the sleeves. "Yes," Ethan said, studying him. The man extended his hand. "Name's Thomas Granger, served with Michael Albright, their father." His gaze shifted past Ethan, settling on the 2 small figures at the table. Hazel froze, her toast halfway to her mouth. Lydia's eyes widened. Thomas's face softened. "You look just like him," he whispered, his throat tightening. Ethan stepped aside, gesturing him in. Thomas moved slowly as if uncertain whether he had the right to intrude, but the gravity of his visit pressed him forward. He carried a worn leather satchel, its surface scuffed and nicked by time. Sitting down at the table, he placed the satchel before him, opening it with deliberate care. Inside was a thick envelope sealed and slightly yellowed at the edges. Thomas slid it toward Ethan. "Michael gave this to me before his last deployment. Said if anything ever happened, and if Monica couldn't be trusted, I should hold on to it. Told me to keep it safe until the girls needed it." Ethan took the envelope, his heart pounding. He opened the clasp, pulling out papers, a notarized will, banking documents, and an investment agreement bearing Michael's neat signature. Every piece was intact, untouched. The truth, undeniable, lay in Ethan's hands. Hazel and Lydia watched with wide eyes, then turned toward Thomas. Hazel's lips quivered before she pushed back her chair and ran into his arms. Lydia followed, clutching his sleeve. Thomas held them both tightly, tears streaking his weathered cheeks as he whispered, "Your father loved you more than anything. He wanted to make sure you'd always be safe." Ethan's chest tightened. The rawness of the moment grounded him. These weren't just papers. They were Michael's final safeguard. A promise entrusted to a comrade. And now it was Ethan's duty to ensure that promise was honored. Atlas patted closer, resting his head on Hazel's lap as she sobbed into Thomas's jacket. The dog's amber eyes lifted to Ethan's, steady and knowing, as though to say, "This is the mission now." Elsewhere in town, Maya Thompson tightened the strap of her satchel as she pushed open the door of the county records office. She had been there most of the morning, combing through financial filings and transaction reports. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the air smelled faintly of dust and paper ink. Maya's persistence paid off. On the screen of the clerk's old computer, she found a record of Monica Albright's recent loan applications. Several had been denied, citing poor credit history and high debt. Maya scrolled further and discovered receipts for luxury purchases, jewelry, designer clothes, spa, visits far beyond what Monica's modest income could support. She leaned back, running a hand through her curls. Monica wasn't just careless, she was desperate. With debts piling and lifestyle demands growing, the trust fund was her only target. If she gained control of it, the girl's inheritance would vanish in a storm of indulgence. "Got you," Maya murmured under her breath, jotting notes furiously. She snapped a quick photo of the records with her phone before the clerk could peer over suspiciously. Then she gathered her things and left, her heart racing with the urgency of what she had discovered. As she stepped outside, she spotted a familiar figure. Clara Whitmore, jaw drawn tight, was crossing the street toward her. The old woman's face was drawn but determined. "Maya," Clara called softly, "have you learned anything?" "Plenty," Mia replied, lowering her voice. "Monica's drowning, in debt. She has every reason to stealth those girls' future." Clara nodded gravely. "Then we must stand with them. I've been silent too long, but not anymore. You can count on me when the time comes." Maya's chest swelled with admiration. In Clara's frailty, there was a steel resolve that no storm could quench. "Thank you," Mia said sincerely. "Your voice could be the one that tips the balance." That night, Ethan checked on the twins. They had been restless, their dreams broken by whimpers. Lydia clutched her stuffed toy tightly, murmuring in her sleep. Hazel tossed, whispering, "Daddy," under her breath. Ethan stood at the doorway, the sight cutting into him. Atlas was already there, sprawled across the threshold like a guard, his ears flicked, his gaze sweeping the shadows, every breath measured as though he bore the weight of 2 new lives in his care. Ethan crouched beside him, stroking the thick fur between his ears. "You know, don't you?" he murmured. Atlas lifted, his head, eyes glowing softly in the dim light, then rested his chin back on his paws, immovable. The cabin was quiet except for the crackle of the fire. Yet within its walls, something had shifted. The promise Michael Albright once made had crossed years and distance to land here, carried by an old friend's hands, protected by a loyal dog, and shouldered now by a young officer who could not look away. Ethan folded the documents carefully and locked them in his desk. The path forward was dangerous. Monica would not surrender easily, not with Victor Kane at her side. But the evidence was real, and the girls had more allies now than they ever had before. Tomorrow would bring new battles. Tonight they had a roof, a fire, and the strength of promises kept. The courthouse in Maplewood Hollow stood like an austere sentinel in the center of town, its brick facade stree with decades of rain and snow. On the morning of the trial, the steps leading up to its double oak doors were crowded with townsfolk. Some clutched umbrellas against the drizzle. Others carried hand-painted signs that read, "Justice for Hazel and Lydia." The story had spread beyond whispers now. It was on everyone's lips, stirring indignation and resolve. Inside, the air was hushed, taut with expectation. The courtroom itself was paneled in oak, its high ceilings echoing even the faintest shuffle. Ethan Cole walked in escorting Hazel and Lydia, both dressed in modest clothes borrowed from a neighbor. Hazel wore a pale blue dress with a cardigan. Lydia, a neat skirt and blouse. There. Small hands clung to Ethan's knuckles, white with nerves. Beside them patted Atlas, his polished coat gleaming under the overhead lights, his gait steady, his head held high. Monica was already seated at the defense table. She looked every inch the picture of poise. Auburn hair styled meticulously, a tailored navy suit, pearl earrings that gleamed under the lights. Beside her sat Victor Kane, the attorney Maya had uncovered, a tall man in a gray three-piece suit, dark hair slicked back, his sharp jaw cleanly shaven. His eyes were cold, calculating, and he radiated a confidence bred from years of twisting the law to suit wealthy clients. As the judge, Honorable Samuel Greer, entered the chamber, the room rose. Judge Greer was in his late 50s, broad-shouldered with thinning silver hair and a lined butt fair. Known in the county for his no-nonsense demeanor, he carried a gavilis, though it were an extension of his will. "Be seated," he intoned. His voice graveled deep. The proceedings began with Victor Kane rising smoothly to his feet. His voice was silk, his arguments sharp. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we've here is a gross misunderstanding. My client, Mrs. Monica Albright, has been falsely accused of cruelty. The children, while no doubt confused and distressed, have exaggerated events. They are young, impressionable, easily swayed." Monica dabbed theatrically at her eyes with a handkerchief. Murmurs rippled through the spectators, but Kane pressed on. "We will show that Mrs. Albright provided for her stepchildren, disciplined them as any mother might, and that this entire spectacle is a fabrication stirred by gossip and, dare I say, opportunism." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, his eyes fixed on the twins, who sat nervously in the front row with Atlas leaning against their legs. The prosecution called its first witness, Thomas Granger. The old veteran rose, his army jacket neatly buttoned. He took the stand with a steadiness born from years of discipline, his pale blue eyes fixed on the jury as he held up the WARN envelope. "Michael Albright was my friend," Thomas said simply. "Before his last deployment, he entrusted me with these papers, his will, the trust documents, banking contracts. He told me he didn't trust Monica with them. He asked me to keep them safe for his daughters, and I did." Gasps swept the room as the documents were entered into evidence. Victor Kane rose to object, but Judge Greer silenced him with a firm rap of the gavel. Next came Maya Thompson. Dressed in a plain blazer, her dark curls pulled back, Mia carried herself with quiet confidence. She detailed her findings: Monica's mounting debts, her lavish spending, her consultations with Kane. Mia laid out transaction records, photographs of receipts, and correspondence linking Monica directly to schemes of financial exploitation. Her voice never wavered. This was not carelessness. It was calculated. She sought to strip Hazel and Lydia of their rightful inheritance. Kane's objections fell flat. The evidence was too precise, too damning. Then Clara Whitmore stepped forward. Her shawl draped across her frail shoulders. Though her voice quavered at first, resolve soon steadied it. "I saw it with my own eyes," she said firmly. "That stormy night Monica threw those girls out into the rain, suitcase and all. She shut the door on them. I was too afraid to act then. But I will not stay silent." The courtroom was silent, but for the sound of Clara's words sinking into every heart. Finally, it was the twins' turn. Hazel and Lydia were escorted to the witness stand, their small figures dwarfed by the solemn furniture. Ethan knelt before them briefly, whispering, "You're safe. Just tell the truth." Atlas followed, pressing close as thought to lend them his strength. Hazel's voice trembled as she began. She locked yous in the closet, sometimes for hours. She didn't give us food. We were so hungry." Lydia clutched her sister's hand, her own tears slipping silently down her cheeks. "She said Daddy didn't want us." "But I know he did," Lydia whispered. As the words broke from them, Atlas stepped forward. He pressed his body against the stand, lowering himself until his head rested against their small legs. Thamage, two trembling children clinging to each other while a loyal dog shielded them, brought the room to a hush so profound even the judge paused before speaking. The jury leaned forward, the sight etching itself into their memories. Victor. Kane tried to cross-examine, his tone clipped and pointed, but each question faltered against the quiet dignity of the children's truth. Their words, simple and unadorned, carried more weight than any argument Kane could weave. Outside the courthouse, Maya's articles had already been published. Local papers carried headlines, "Stepchildren cast into storm" and "Trust betrayed." Social media buzzed with outrage. By the time the trial broke for recess, a crowd had gathered on the courthouse lawn. They held signs, chanted, and demanded justice. Inside, the jury members glanced toward the windows where the muffled voices of townspeople filtered in. The pressure of the community's outrage pressed against the walls like an invisible tide. The jurors' expressions grew harder, more resolute. Ethan remained at the twins' side, one hand steady on Hazel's shoulder, his gaze never leaving Monica. She sat rigid, her mask of composure cracking at the edges as Victor Kane whispered urgently in her ear. For the first time, her eyes betrayed something not rehearsed. Fear. The day waned, shadows stretching across the courtroom floor. Judge Greer announced that deliberations would begin the following morning. Thievery filed out, leaving behind a silence heavy with expectation. Hazel and Lydia leaned against Ethan, exhausted but comforted by Atlas's constant warmth. Thomas sat nearby, his weathered hand resting over the documents he had safeguarded for so long. Maya closed her laptop, her eyes shining with conviction. Clara held her rosary quietly, lips moving in prayer. Justice was not yet sealed, but the tide had shifted. The truth was laid bare, the community awake, and the walls Monica had built around her lies were crumbling. The courthouse was brimming with expectation as Judge Samuel Greer re-entered the chamber. The jury had returned, their expressions solemn, their duty finished. Outside, the muffled chants of townspeople rose through the open windows, echoing like waves of judgment, waiting to crash. Ethan sat between Hazel and Lydia, his hands steady, on Hazel's small shoulder, while Atlas lay stretched across their feet, a living shield. "All rise," the bailiff announced. The room grew silent as the judge cleared his throat and began to speak. Having reviewed the evidence, the testimony of witnesses, and the recommendations of the jury, this court finds Monica Albright guilty on the charges of child neglect and abuse, as well as conspiracy to defraud the estate of Michael Albright. His gavel came down with finality. She is hereby sentenced to 10 years in state prison and is ordered to pay restitution equal to the funds misappropriated. Effective immediately, she relinquishes all guardianship rights. The gasp that swept through. The courtroom was sharp, followed by an audible sigh of relief. Monica, once composed and polished, now sat pale and rigid, her hands trembling in her lap. Her attorney, Victor Kane, pressed his lips thin, eyes cold but defeated. For the first time, Monica's facade crumbled, her mask gone, revealing the fear beneath. Hazel and Lydia clutched each other, tears streaming down their cheeks. Ethan bent toward them, whispering softly, "It's over now. You're safe." Atlas nuzzled their legs, tail swishing once, as if he too understood the gravity of the moment. Judge Greer's voice continued, steady and firm. "The inheritance and trust fund left by Michael Albright shall be restored in full to his daughters, Hazel and Lydia Albright. Until such time as they reach maturity, the assets will be safeguarded, under the oversight of a community-appointed guardianship council, ensuring that their futures remain protected. Hazel's small hand clutched Lydia's, and Lydia whispered a shaky, "Daddy kept his promise." Ethan's chest tightened, the weight of their words pressing against his heart. Then came the final declaration: custodial guardianship pending full adoption. Proceedings is granted on a temporary basis to Officer Ethan Cole and his service companion Atlas. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Ethan blinked, absorbing the words. Though temporary, it was the first step toward something more permanent, toward family. He glanced down at the girls. They gazed up at him with trust and hope shining through their tears. In the days that followed, life in Maplewood Hollow seemed to brighten. The local paper carried bold headlines celebrating the verdict. Maya Thompson's series of investigative reports spread beyond the county, shared widely online and earning recognition from state press associations. She was called the voice for the voiceless in one editorial. When asked for comment, Mia only shook her head and replied, "The real heroes are those two girls and the people who stood with them." Maya herself felt the honor, but what mattered most to her was not the recognition. It was the sight of Hazel and Lydia smiling again in the steady presence of Ethan and Atlas by their side. She visited the cabin often now, bringing fresh bread or books for the girls. Her once solitary life had become entwined with theirs, and, though she had never thought of herself as someone who belonged to a family, she found herself warming to the role. The community of veterans rallied as well. Word spread among Ethan's old unit and through Thomas Granger's network of comrades. Within a week, trucks and vans rolled into the gravel driveway of a small rental home prepared for Hazel and Lydia. Veterans unloaded furniture, painted walls, and patched a leaky roof. They worked with laughter, teasing one another about sore backs and stubborn nails, turning the labor into a celebration. Thomas himself directed much of the work, his commanding voice carrying across the yard. Despite his age, his strength and presence inspired the younger men to push harder. "We fought wars together," he told Ethan with a wry smile. "But this, Cole, this is the battle that matters." Clara Whitmore arrived with baskets of quilt she had sewn, her frail frame nearly hidden beneath the colorful bundles. Shep pressed them into Hazel's arms, whispering, "Warmth for when you need it most." The girls hugged her tightly, their gratitude unspoken, but clear. By late afternoon, the little house stood transformed, its porch freshly painted, windows gleaming, and a swing set newly assembled in the yard. When the girls arrived to see it, their faces lit up. Hazel darted from room to room while Lydia threw herself onto the swing, laughter bursting free for the first time in what felt like forever. Atlas bounded after them, tail high, barking with unrestrained joy. For once his posture was not that of a sentinel, but of a dog at play, reveling in the happiness around him. The evening sun slanted low across the yard, painting everything in gold. The crowd of helpers gathered on the lawn, their laughter fading into quiet contentment as they watched Hazel and Lydia chase Atlas across the grass. Their hair gleamed in the light, their shrieks of delight ringing through the neighborhood. Ethan stood at the edge of the porch, Ma at his side. She folded her arms, her gray eyes softening as she watched the scene. "Looks like a family," she murmured. Ethan exhaled slowly, the corners of his mouth lifting in a smile he hadn't realized he could still wear. "It does," he said. "It really does." For the first time in years, Ethan felt the shadow of his own loneliness recede. He saw a beginning here. Two girls finding safety, a dog fulfilling his purpose, a woman whose courage brought light in himself, learning that duty could grow into something deeper. Love. The laughter of children swirled around them, mingling with the warm glow of the setting sun. For Hazel and Lydia, the nightmare was behind them. Ahead lay something fragile yet strong, a home, a future, and the certainty that they would never be abandoned again. At the end of this story, we are reminded that sometimes miracles do not come with thunder or lightning, but through the steady hands of ordinary people, the loyalty of a dog, the courage of a child, and the quiet promise of friendship kept. In the darkest nights, God's light can shine through those who choose compassion over indifference and love over fear. In our daily lives, we'll encounter moments where we can be that light for someone else. A kind word to a stranger, a helping hand to a neighbor, or the courage to stand against injustice. These small acts blessed by God can grow into miracles that change the course of another's life. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to share it with others. Leave a comment with your thoughts and subscribe to our channel so more voices can hear stories of hope and redemption. May the Lord bless you and your loved ones, guiding your path with grace, strength, and compassion.